775,000 people.
Well, that was some party in downtown Detroit. 775,000 people, shattering the NFL draft attendance record.
This is the future. Evolution. This is the future. Evolution.
All right, welcome back. It's like I never left. It is the off-the-cuff version of Rock Down Detroit Lions, and today we have a special guest. It is the Seahawks, Seahawks Forever podcast. That's right, with Dan. And Dan's going to be joining us here in just a minute. He's going to be giving us all the juicy news about the Seattle Seahawks and what our Detroit Lions fans need to worry about for this upcoming Monday night showdown in Motown. It's going to be an exciting game. Two teams that I think many of us feel are very closely matched in this game, and one team that may be untested, one team tested, but I want to hear from Dan and what he thinks about his Seattle Seahawks as we head into Monday night. So without further ado, here is Dan with the Seahawks Forever podcast. Welcome in. You know, when you talk about a fan base that has been really needing something, we finally have it. And the thing that I always tell the fans is, you know, it's so quickly lost in this game, you know, from season to season, and the Seahawks seem to have never really lost it. I mean, even between Pete Carroll and Macdonald now, or, you know, all the seasons when the Seahawks were just always there. I mean, they're always at the top of the list every single season. It must be nice to live near the top, right? I'm hoping that the Lions get there soon. We have a long way to go still. But what do you see coming up in this game on Monday night from, I guess, your perspective? A resurgence of a Seattle team with a coaching change and a Detroit Lions team that is kind of on the mend, doesn't really know where they are yet offensively. Where do you see the matchup headed? I guess we could start with number one. You know, really it talks about the overall rankings that Seattle is right now. What do you see?
It's funny when you mention, you know, being near the top. I am old enough to remember when things weren't good here. And I think it's one of the things I appreciate about what you guys are going through there is you've been through the lean years. You know what it's like to have no hope of making the playoffs, and yet you live and die with your team every single week. And that's what it was like during, you know, different portions of the Seahawks history as I was growing up. And then you get to the top like the Lions are, and expectations change. And so, you know, I'm sure you hear about that on your show on a weekly basis. Sometimes, you know, things just aren't good enough, even though things are really good, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I look forward to this game, and I see a lot of similarities. I mean, I don't expect Monday to be much different than what we've seen the last couple of years. I think there's reasons to believe that it's going to be a high scoring affair, and that these two teams are going to put on a heck of a show. At least this time it's under the national TV lights, which I'm really excited about. I'm glad the league saw to put this one on Monday night. It's been a really interesting 8 or 9 months here. You know, when you get 14, 15 years of the same culture and the same coaching staff and the same messaging, and, you know, what Pete Carroll did here might never be rivaled. I mean, Mike Macdonald can only aspire to put 15 years together like Pete Carroll did. And yet the transition from, you know, oldest coach in the league to the youngest, a legendary coach with a lifelong storied coaching history, to one who has never been a head coach, has been about as seamless and positive and encouraging as you could even imagine. And I think this week it's in the spotlight a little bit because of the piece Brady Henderson did on ESPN a couple of days ago about Mike Macdonald, and it just feels like this guy was born to be a head coach. And I would imagine that's kind of how you guys felt there in Detroit once you started to see that Dan Campbell was the real deal. So I think there's more similarities than differences in these teams. I think you can make a parallel between the two quarterbacks even and kind of their story a little bit. So I can't wait to get this one going.
Yeah, me too. And I like the Macdonald story. So it's kind of funny that Aiden Hutchinson was talking about Macdonald. You know, he was the former University of Michigan defensive coordinator, and Aiden has a lot of respect for him. And he had a little piece in an interview yesterday where he said, you know, Macdonald always said he never wanted to be a head coach. And here he is as a head coach. So I guess, you know, to kind of go off script here, has there been any conversation so far in Seattle about Macdonald and why, you know, he aspired to become a head coach at this time? Maybe as where before he thought that he really, according to Aiden, didn't want a head coaching, position per se.
Yeah. Well, I think things can change rather quickly in this industry. And, you know, after he left Michigan, he went to Baltimore in a different role. And he went as defensive coordinator and succeeded Wink Martindale there. It's a different level of responsibility. It's a different level of accomplishment when you have the kind of success that he did over those 2 years. And so it just may have been one of those things where he didn't, the self-awareness hadn't caught up yet to what his potential was, if that makes sense. And and those things shift and those things change. And he was certainly a hot candidate in the offseason and went through a number of interviews before the Seahawks were able to interview him because of some of the restrictions. And, you know, I haven't heard him speak to that yet. So that's interesting. If I could be in a room with him, that would be a question I would ask him. But, you know, it's possible even that maybe he entered into the interview process without really knowing what he wanted and kind of learned some things about himself during that process. But certainly one thing that became evident immediately is that the cohesion between he and our general manager, John Schneider, and I have been in a room with the two of those men together. It's like they're lifelong friends, and you could see how they meshed and how their vision meshed and their personality meshed, and it just seemed like a perfect match. And it's one of the reasons the Seahawks were so patient in how they played that coaching search, because Macdonald was the target all along.
Interesting. Well, I think I really want to ask the question that a lot of people want to know, and that is, I guess I'll start with a statement. Seattle played two very tight games to start against Denver, 26-20, and the Patriots 23-20. And in week 3, they really beat up on a depleted Dolphins team without Tua. And I mean, they crushed them 24-3. This defense seems to be for real. The offense seems to be for real. But do you feel that Seattle's had a big enough test so far this season to have confidence in the early success that they're having right now with a hot 3-0 start? And what do you see as the biggest test for the Seahawks in week 4 against the Lions? And I guess kind of give us your rundown here. Is this going to be the biggest test that Seattle's faced so far?
Yeah, I'll answer the last question first. Yes. And then the first question of have they been tested enough yet? That answer is no. I mean, very simply, I am confident that the pieces are there for this defense to be dynamic and outstanding and consistently, and to be able to do what they've done in some ways the first 3 weeks against good teams, but they haven't played a good team yet. And so we don't know it. It's a young defense. It's one that's still evolving and still learning Macdonald's system. I still don't think they may have installed the entire defense by now, but they haven't unveiled it yet. After the New England game, Devin Witherspoon said, we haven't even opened the playbook yet.
That's
Mike
scary.
Macdonald has talked pretty openly teaching process and to put any more on players than he thinks they can handle. And so he's just been very careful about easing them into some of those things. And maybe it was the competition. I mean, he's not going to give that away, but maybe it was, well, we didn't have to show it all against Bo Nix in his first NFL start at Lumen Field. And so, which
I would agree with, by the way. I would agree that you don't do that.
No, Nix proved pretty clearly that he wasn't ready for that day one. Right. by week 3, he sure looked a whole lot better, and I think he's going to look better by the end of the season. I think I'm pretty bullish on Bo Nix, but he wasn't ready that day, and I don't think Sean Payton did him any favors in how he approached the game plan that day either. I think that if you look at each game in a vacuum, that's a game that should have easily been a much easier victory, but the Seahawks kind of couldn't get out of their way in the first half on defense, and 2 safeties, and just were under the shadow of their own goalposts for a while before they put it together. New England was weird because we couldn't stop the run. And we were all having flashbacks here and PTSD about the last couple of years. And ultimately what got Pete Carroll fired is he just couldn't stop anybody on the ground. They put that back together against the Dolphins, but the Dolphins, as you said, were certainly at a disadvantage without Tua. So we don't know. And I'm as open-mindedly excited about seeing the matchup on Monday because they need that kind of a test, because it does get a lot tougher from here. We face much, much better teams, much, much better offenses as we move forward. Unfortunately now, and I know you guys are dealing with this too, we got a lot of guys on that side of the ball that are banged up right now. And we're looking forward to seeing practice today, hoping some other guys get out there.
Well, there's definitely been a concern around Detroit, within the fan base about our offense starting slow and real slow for what we're used to. We've been kind of, blessed the last, 28 games or 29, 30 games now prior to this season where we started out, fairly hot in games and scoring a lot of points. And that has me a little bit concerned, running up against this Seattle defense. But talking about offense here, the Seattle Seahawks are ranked, according to PFF now, 8th total offense, but 25th total O-line. And that would break down with number 7 in passing, number 6 in rushing, 29th in pass blocking, and number 9 in run blocking. And according to Next Gen Stats, which, Dan, I don't know if you know this about me yet, I'm kind of a stats nerd. I like to look at a lot of different stats and kind of marry it up with, what's kind of happening in the game for each team and how it can, figure into the game plan each week. But Geno has had 2.66 seconds on average to throw the ball now through 3 games, which is not enough time. Clearly he's got to use his legs, but I don't see a whole lot of, run yards behind his name to start the season. So he ranks 26th out of 32 with time to throw this season. And he's taken the 13th most sacks through 3 games with a total of 8. Now this O-line is allowed the 8th most pressures with 40. And he's been pressured 35.4% of plays, which also ranks 13th. But Geno has been playing like a man apart. 74.8% of his passes have been completed, which is incredible, especially based on the stats that I just mentioned. How is he doing it? How is this offensive line not, getting him killed every play with those kind of stats, I guess, is the biggest question. So who's pulling the puppet strings right now for Geno? Because that's incredible.
And it looks even worse when you look at ESPN's pass block win rate. I mean, they're 31st there. Offensive line's been an issue here for going back 5-6 years, and you can really go all the way back to when they traded Max Unger for Jimmy Graham, and they've never really kind of caught up to what the offensive line was during the Super Bowl years. It's remarkable, and we can feel the conversation starting to shift here, where we saw this the second half of last year. Like the Geno Smith story is kind of a tale of 2 seasons to begin with. He won Comeback Player of the Year in 2022, and he was a feel-good story. Although he started hot, faded at the end of the season. Last year was a little bit different. He struggled the first 6-7 games, and then the last 7 or 8 games, he's about as good as anyone in the NFC. Behind a terrible offensive line and a team that couldn't run and a defense that couldn't get off the field. This year, he's getting more opportunities because the defense is limiting opposing offenses. I mean, last year, the Seahawks were dead last in number of plays run in the NFL, so the opportunities for Geno were limited. There was pressure on him to make the most of what he had. What we're seeing this year, I think, is a kind of a culmination of that journey. He's just so comfortable in his skin right now. He's so confident in his ability, and I think he has found the perfect, I don't want to say mentor, muse. Ryan Grubb is an ideal match, I think, for Geno's skill set. They seem to have been on the same page since Grubb arrived after Macdonald hired him. I think the offensive scheme itself fits Geno's skill set perfectly. And that 2.66 seconds, it's interesting how you can look at stats different ways. When I first saw that stat earlier in the week, it was presented as Geno's getting the ball out the 7th quickest of anyone in the league, right? As a good thing that he knows he has to.
Glass half empty,
Right.
right?
Right. He has to, but he's making that work. And yet
Yeah.
there's still moments where, and I think this plays to that confidence that he's playing with and how sure he is of himself, that even though that offensive line has struggled to protect him for very long, he still trusts it, if that makes sense. And the best example that might be, and there's a bunch of examples in that Patriots game where he was just unbelievable. And you mentioned the completion percentage. There were 6 drops in that game from our receivers and tight ends. I mean, that percentage should be even higher. But the long touchdown pass last week against the Dolphins to DK Metcalf, you'll watch it on video. Pressure's coming. And he gives a little subtle pump fake. He has to wait a beat, and he didn't have a lot of time. And he kind of had to throw that one off his back foot because he couldn't lean into it. But he still trusts his offensive line, trusts in himself to be able to get the ball down the field. I'm a little worried about how that's going to translate against a guy like Hutchinson, because Geno's thrown 3 picks this year, 2 of the 3 directly related to being pressured, getting hit as he's throwing, but still thinking he can make a play way downfield. So he needs to be careful about that. But I'm sensing that the narrative on Geno is starting to shift slightly, and every time he puts another one of these weeks together, I think even now, just 3 years into being a full-time starter for Seattle, some people that maybe have doubted him are starting to take him a little more seriously.
So I guess for me, the bigger question is he still the dual threat Geno? And, if you just look at the stats, I mean, I love the eye test too. Like, you got to have both. When you look at the stats, it would say he's not running the ball a whole lot. Why? Maybe he really hasn't needed to. Maybe, the run game, like Charbonnet, we'll talk about him in a minute, but I don't think he had a good game until the second week, or was it the third week? He strung together like 91 yards.
He really struggled in New England, but almost ran for 100 yards and really finished the game out with a big 98-yard drive and put it away against Miami.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously it's been different without Walker in the game too, but the biggest question I guess I would ask about Geno is he still a dual threat? I mean, clearly he doesn't want to have to run. I mean, he's kind of getting up there in age too, but he's still quick as all get out. If he's forced to run, I understand it, but do you think that this offense is going to utilize Geno, in the fashion of making him a dual threat eligible quarterback against the Detroit Lions, given the pass rush implications that are coming against them, or no? Have you seen a change in I guess the way that he's quarterbacking right now with not running the ball as often?
We haven't seen any intent to get him on the move. He is sneaky athletic for his size. And week 1 against the Broncos, he kind of got the offense. He kind of broke through and got the offense going with that. I think it was a 36-yard touchdown run where I believe he clocked one of the highest miles per hour on the GPS of anyone in the league that week. So he can still do it. And we've seen flashes of him being able to be creative and throw the football on the move. It's just not something he looks to do. I think that's one of those boxes that you can check when you look at similarities between he and Jared Goff. I mean, Geno can move, he can run, he doesn't look for it. And so we'll see a boot concept from time to time, but it's more because they want to create misdirection for the defense than it is let's get Geno outside the pocket. Now, there were moments early in that Denver game where I thought, okay, we better get him on the move because that line can't hold, and then it got better. And so we haven't seen that yet. But maybe we will. They do run some RPO stuff.
Yeah.
He just never keeps it.
Well, I think that to your point though, there's a definite difference here between like a Kyler Murray and a Geno. Like, I think Kyler has a lot more plays by design, right? And then you've got Jared Goff that I call the giraffe. I mean, he's not supposed to run. It looks all sorts of awkward when he takes off, but we love it. We don't like him to run because we don't want him to get hurt. The bigger question to your offensive line is how battered and tattered are they headed into this game? Now, the Lions are obviously reeling from a really bad Cardinals game with injuries. And I've never seen injuries like this in the NFL. It is so bad. I went through the sheet today with everybody this morning, and hundreds of injuries and probably 100 or more IR guys to start the season. Maybe more than that. It's nuts. How beat up is this offensive line? And is Aiden Hutchinson going to have another premier opportunity going up against a second or third tier tackle or guard in this game?
Well, I think there's two parts to this answer. The first one is he's going to be facing the Seahawks' third string right tackle. And I would imagine that's where they will try to position him the most, because Charles Cross on the left side has been playing his best football in year 3 now, of all of them. And until last week, hadn't given up a single pressure. He's been outstanding. The issue, but yet then last week, Stone Forsythe, who is playing right tackle now because Abe Lucas still on injured reserve, George Fant, who they signed in the offseason to be that bridge and be a swing tackle, he's on injured reserve now. Forsythe was the highest graded offensive lineman for us last week on PFF, played an outstanding game. And so as a pass protector, Forsythe has shown that he can be effective. The issue for the Seahawks has been on the inside. Their guard play's been abysmal. Laken Tomlinson on the left side and Anthony Bradford at right guard. And there's a huge conversation here about why are they not playing Christian Haynes, who was their 3rd round pick this year out of UConn. So it's been on the interior. And I don't know, I haven't watched enough tape of the Lions to know if they ever move Aiden inside to take advantage of that. But now both of those guards have shown up on the injury report and were limited in practice this week. So I expect them to play. There were no known injuries coming out of the Miami game. I think it's probably just maintenance and typical, kind of being nicked up stuff. And then in the middle, they have Connor Williams, who, coming off the ACL, they were able to sign him late in free agency. He's still kind of getting back to what, he was before the injury, but he's been healthy. So the interior's a little banged up, but even if they play, they've just been bad. And that's what concerns me, I think, the most going up against the Lions is they were able to put together a better game against the Dolphins, but it's still, there's just some really, really bad reps on tape from our guards.
Well, it could be interesting. The Lions still have DJ Reader healthy. Ali McNeil is 50-50, for this weekend. There it is. There's another 10 push-ups, guys. Monday night. Every time I say this weekend, I got to do 10 push-ups because I keep forgetting it's Monday night. So it's going to be interesting. You're going to have Aiden. You're going to have DJ. Clearly Davenport's out. Ali McNeil may play. You've got Mekhi Wingo, Josh Pascal, who's going to get to start on the right end there for the Detroit Lions. So we'll have some players. I don't know if AG is going to have these guys with their ears pinned back. This last weekend against the Cardinals, we've seen a different AG defense. We saw a more disciplined defense. They weren't just getting after Kyler Murray on every play. They were kind of letting it naturally happen, by winning their reps, and they played more of a containment style of a defense. At some points throughout the game, you would see where Aiden was rushing more often and getting after Kyler. But again, it felt more natural. And this is the first time I've ever seen this defense in 4 seasons have a game that was so well disciplined. Kind of brought us, I ain't gonna lie, brought a smile to my face to actually see it for once, because you're getting prepared for Geno. Do you feel like if the Lions get after Geno this weekend and really kind of go all out after him and pin their ears back and try to take advantage of a beat up offensive line, that it's going to get him in trouble? And then I guess a follow-up to that would be more of a side note kind of question is Terrion Arnold, our rookie cornerback, has really struggled with pass interference calls and having his hands on receivers more often on third downs to create opportunity at the, with pass interference. Do you feel like Geno's going to take advantage of that?
Well, I think if he gets a sliver of an opportunity, I think they'll try to. The one thing that we're all really enjoying here as Seahawks fans this year is ever since the Seahawks moved on from Darrell Bevell after the whole Super Bowl 49 thing, we've had a couple of offensive coordinators in a row that nobody was very happy with and just didn't seem to have a plan. It didn't seem to have a consistent understanding of how to constantly attack defenses. And what we're loving about Ryan Grubb is his recognition of, first of all, he will stress, in the first couple of drives of the game, you will see him try to stress the Lions defense at every level of the field. He will poke and he will prod and he will test every level of that defense. And if he finds a kink, he will continue to try to take advantage of that. And so if the Lions want to be really aggressive and say, hey, we think our defensive front is better than that offensive line, and that's certainly a reasonable thing for them to think this week as they're in their meeting rooms and on the practice field. And so we're going to come after him because we think we can get to Geno before he hurts us down the field. That can be a slippery slope because Geno sees the field now as well as he ever has in his career. And more so than we have seen in a very long time here, the intention of Ryan Grubb and Geno Smith, this is one of those areas where they align, is they're going to take shots. There are so many plays on tape through these first 3 weeks where Geno ends up with a 10, 15-yard completion, but you can tell before that he wanted the shot. And so they're going to try to test that Lions defense down the field. It just, not to oversimplify things, it's just going to come down to, obviously, the running game will factor into this, but can they keep Geno on his feet long enough to be able to make those plays?
You mentioned the running game. What's up with my guy over there, number 9?
I think he's going to play.
Okay.
I think he's going to play. I wasn't so sure because we're finding that Mike Macdonald is very, very close to the vest and very unforthcoming about injuries. And I actually like it. I like his approach with it. But in fact, he was asked on Monday about some injuries and he said, I'm going to wait until Thursday when I have to tell you guys about that stuff But yesterday was their first practice. And at least during the portion, he's listed as limited. During the portion when reporters were allowed to be out there, was only, kind of stretching and some of the drills. He was out there. And I think the extra day, I think he's going to play. After the injury occurred in week 1, he said, I'm fine after the game. But of course, those oblique injuries can be tricky and you wake up the next day and, not so much. But it doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that's going to keep him out for very long. I'm confident he's going to play.
Well, that's going to be a tough
we'll find out today, obviously. But yeah.
That'll be a tough test for the Lions.
That changes that Seattle offense if he's out there.
It does. And I guess that's probably one of the biggest things that I'm banking on for the Detroit Lions this weekend is we've been really tough against the run. We shut down James Conner last week, I think, to 18 yards. Kyler Murray, I think, had 32-ish, somewhere in that range. But overall, I think we kept the Arizona Cardinals under 70 combined with everybody. Might even been less than 60. If we can shut down the run game, which was what we're expecting to do, that is what this defense is going to have to do. Can Geno and the rest of your offense beat us through the air? Would be my final question about the offense, and then finish with what are your biggest keys to the game offensively for the Hawks, and any bigger matchups or concerns that you may see, and then we'll move on to some of the defensive stuff.
Yeah, let me ask those in reverse order. I think if they're able to run the football, I think that's one of the biggest keys. It's, we can talk about pass protection all we want, but running the football is one of the best elixirs to, poor pass protection. If Ken Walker can get going consistently and be able to impact drives, it changed the game. It blew the game wide open in the second half in both the Denver game and the Miami game. They weren't able to run the ball very effectively in the first half, and then they got things going in the second half. And you could see the impact it had on the offense. The New England game, they couldn't run the football at all. It was like a brick wall. It was only Zach Charbonnet. There was no Ken Walker. I felt like the game plan in New England didn't cater to Charbonnet's strengths or steer away from his weaknesses. A lot of slow developing plays deep in the backfield. Charbonnet is just simply not as explosive and quick to get up to full speed as Ken Walker is. And he was getting caught in the backfield. But Geno was still able to carve up that pretty decent New England secondary. So, not to cop out, I don't know, because we have not seen them against a team like Detroit yet. But the key to all that, I think, if the Seahawks can even be close to 100 yards rushing on some level between Walker and Charbonnet, it's going to go a long way to helping, what I'm sure the Detroit Lions are going to want to do against Geno in that pass offense.
So, not to keep pounding the offense here, but who's the better pass catcher out of the backfield right now between Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker? And are they using them enough in that fashion?
Again, I don't know that we've seen that yet. And it's something that I know I keep saying this, but like, this is what we love about our new offensive coordinator. I mean, it's Mike Macdonald's getting a lot of attention here, as he should.
Yeah.
But Ryan Grubb, I think, deserves a lot of credit for what's been happening as well. And running backs just weren't part of the passing game for the last several years. We've only seen it in flashes so far. Now, to answer your first question, Zach Charbonnet, the scouting report on him coming out of UCLA was that he's a guy that you would use more in the passing game than Ken Walker. Ken just wasn't used that way at Michigan State, but he has that ability. I think it's been untapped. And there were times over the last couple of years where I'd be screaming, just get the ball to him in space. I don't care if it's a well-designed screenplay with pulling, tackles and guards or not, just get the ball out to him in space.
Sure. He's
so dynamic. Charbonnet's he's smoother, very good pass catcher. Had a long touchdown against the Broncos in week 1 on a wheel route. So they do use him in that regard. We haven't seen the volume yet, but it's certainly something that I think is a potential piece of that offense as they move forward. It's certainly something the Lions are going to have to respect.
I like Charbonnet. He was one of my dark horse picks to the Lions. I had him going somewhere around the 3rd, but clearly Brad Holmes had other plans. But I really like Charbonnet. I think he's a dynamic running back, and he's going to be in this league soon enough. Lions.
It's kind of cool how the two running back pairs have some similarities as well, right? I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is the more explosive, quick twitch guy. David Montgomery's the hammer. Charbonnet is not as physical a runner as Montgomery, but he can be. He was a finalist on Angry Runs last week.
Yeah.
But yet, you got Walker, you got that fire and lightning kind of thing a little bit in both these backfields.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's smart to have. You don't see a lot of teams that just run one guy into the dirt all day long anymore. There usually is a 1-2 punch now, and I would definitely say the Seattle Seahawks and the Detroit Lions are definitely up there when you talk about the best 1-2 punches in the league. So the Seattle defense, again, crazy numbers coming out of PFF here. Seattle has the number 1 rated defense per PFF as of last night.
Yeah.
8th in run defense, 7th in tackling, 14th in pass rush, and number 1 in coverage. I didn't see on your injury report if you had any major concerns for the defensive side of the ball, if you wanted to start there. But really at the forefront of Seattle's strong start has been its defense, which is or near the top of the NFL in numerous categories through the first 3 weeks of the season. And according to PFF, like I said, Seattle tops the charts for defense, grade number 1 overall. And many would argue that there's a caveat here, that just who the Seahawks have played. And they faced a rookie quarterback, Bo Nix, in week 1, journeyman backup Jacoby Brissett in week 2, and then Skylar Thompson for Miami in week 3, and Tim Boyle, who the Lions know well, this past Sunday. That's not exactly a grueling stretch of opposing quarterbacks right now. So,
putting it mildly.
Yeah. How concerned are you with that aspect of it, that they haven't had a huge test right now? And I guess, where do you see this defense coming in this weekend to try to cause some havoc? Because I got to say something. Last year, I'm sitting in the stands watching the game, and the Seattle Seahawks were probably, and I don't mean this in a negative way, the most disrespectful team I have ever seen come into Ford Field. Like, they didn't respect us at all. They had no respect for the Lions team. They ran right through us. And that's what they were going to do that day. They wanted to play bully ball. They got up early. They pounded us hard. I mean, they did everything that they needed to do to win that game. And I tell you what, if that same energy comes in again, this is going to be a very difficult game for the Lions. And I just don't know where they got the attitude from, but man. It was on
I
display.
wish I wish that had continued the rest of the season. Maybe, although things would be much different than they are now, and perhaps Pete Carroll would still be at the helm. It's all about who you play, right? I mean, the numbers look great. They're number 2 in defensive DVOA. It'll be interesting to see. I think it's after week 4 when DVOA becomes weighted and it actually matters who you played. And I think they lead the league in total pressures too. You have to take into account who they've played. You also have to take into account, you have the one game against Miami where they were playing from ahead the whole game. And so they were able to pin their ears back and really go after Skylar Thompson. Flip side of that is they got pounded in the running game and gave up 180 yards rushing against New England. And yet they're still that high in those rankings. There's enough there for me to be confident that this is going to translate to playing good teams too, because of how they're doing it. It's remarkable to me, especially given Pete Carroll's reputation as he was built on defense, right? And there was a time where he was at the forefront of, he's considered one of the best in the league, and other teams were trying to copy the Pete Carroll style of defense. They still are. The San Francisco 49ers are still trying to chase that same scheme. Now it's different, and we're seeing it executed differently. Players on the back end in particular just seem like they know where they're supposed to be. We're not seeing the big coverage breaks. We're seeing quicker reactions. Players are just being taught better. They understand the scheme better. They're breaking on the ball faster. They're all getting there at the same time. It's coming from everywhere. Whereas even in the last few years, when the Seahawks would from time to time put up some big sack numbers, it came in bunches. It's much more relentless and consistent now. And so I do think that's going to translate better against better teams. And also I just think that talent's there. It's not like you look at the roster and go, how are they doing this? Like at every level they have talented players. The concern this week is, you asked about injuries. Heck yes, they have some concerns. Byron Murphy's going to be out. Mm-hmm. That's a hamstring injury. I don't think we're going to see him for a while. That's a tricky one. And I think they're going to be really cautious with that and look at the big picture. And he's been fantastic. The numbers might not jump off the page, but this is a guy that in his rookie year through 3 weeks has been getting as many double teams as anyone on that line, even as many, if not more so than Leonard Williams. Like, teams are focusing on Byron Murphy when he's on the field. So they're going to be without him. Right. Leonard Williams is on the injury list too. Left the game against Miami, tried to come back, couldn't. But that one's a rib injury. Ribs can be managed. I expect him to play Monday. The question would just be how effective is he going to be? And then the big thing we're looking for today in practice is, will Uchenna Nwosu be able to go full in practice? The Seahawks chose not to put him on injury reserve, hoping he'd be back at least for this game. But then yesterday he did not practice after Macdonald had said he would try to give it a go. He's their best pass rusher. As good as Boye Mafe and Derek Hall have been, Uchenna is the guy. And if he can be anywhere close to 100%, that changes things a little bit on the Seattle defense. We'll find out more about that today.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So there's been some conflicting reports on Nwosu. Like the Seahawks report says he didn't practice, and then there was another report that said he did make it onto the practice field last night. And I found that interesting. So I'm not sure. Like you said, we'll find out more today. But yeah, you've got quite the injury list. You got a lot of limiteds. I guess
some of those are maintenance. Jonathan Hankins is limited after a big game against Miami. I expect that's probably just veteran limited stuff.
Right.
I think he'll be out there.
Yeah. Jared Goff. So Jared Goff has had his struggles this year. He's been struggling, holding the ball a little bit at times. He's been unusually slow at identifying, an option for a quick release. I feel like Josh Reynolds was always that guy that he knew was going to be in the right spot at the right time, kind of had that outlet valve. Sam Laporta hasn't been the same this season. I'm not sure if he's been battling injury the whole year and it's just been kind of, tucked under the rug a little bit, not talked about, but he's now has another injury. I guess in week 2 versus the Bucks, the Lions scored just 1 out of 7 times in the red zone, which that can't happen. You're not going to win games, especially if you're not putting your kicker out there to at least get you some points. what do you see from a limiting factor that this defense can do, even though that there's a few injuries? What do you see that this defense can do against the Lions team? Where can they have some success? And I guess, a side note, when Eric and I were down at the combine, Byron Murphy was one of the guys that we both identified that was just going to be a game wrecker.
Yeah.
You've got a game wrecker. I mean, he's got redwoods for legs. I mean, they're insanely big. Dude's going to be awesome to watch. But anyway, now that the number one security blanket is out for Goff, right? Frank Ragnow. I mean, that is his true security blanket. That's his bread and butter up front. Where do you see your defense having some success this weekend against the Lions?
It's interesting because I thought, kind of trying to get a gauge for how Goff's been playing the first 3 weeks. I was talking to someone the other day about how the game plan might look, and I thought, I wonder if maybe Macdonald only rushes 4. He'll use some of that sim pressure package, so you don't always know exactly who's coming, but maybe he only rushes 4 and he drops guys back and he tries to cover because Goff's he's turned the ball over this year, and maybe you try to force that. But then you look at the numbers, and this has been the story all throughout Goff's career. It's one of the things I think that got him run out of LA is, and this applies to some extent to every quarterback, but the splits are more pronounced with Goff. In clean pockets, he's deadly. When you pressure him, he's not. And so I think we're going to see Macdonald turn up the pressures and send some extra rushers a little bit more in this game than what we've seen. And part of that is due to that history with Goff, but also just how good that offensive line is. I mean, Penei Sewell's about as good as it gets. Taylor Decker's about as good as it gets over on the other side. And even without Ragnow, my understanding is, and I'd love to ask you this and get your take on this, is they're going to move Graham Glasgow over probably to play center as opposed to going to the backup, who I can't remember his name, but I know he's very inexperienced.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're going with Graham from what we understand. He's already been kind of given the nod to get in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, he's played center in the league, and I mean, that's just such a good offensive line that we're going to find out more about this Seahawks defense this week than we have in the first 3. I think you're going to see more of that. I expect we're going to see more of that playbook. When Devin Witherspoon says we haven't unveiled it yet, this is the game where you do, and you unload all the bullets you have in your chamber if you have to try to get to Goff. Because the one thing we have not seen out of this Seahawks defense, as well as they've played, as physical as they've been, as much as they've flown around, and as I mentioned earlier, it's coming from everywhere. Aside from the 2 picks against Knicks in week 1, which were very stereotypical, cliche rookie interceptions, Seahawks haven't taken the ball away. And I expect that will regress to the mean at some point. They will. Mike Macdonald teams always have. They led the NFL in turnovers last year in Baltimore, but it hasn't happened so far. And, they've been close. They've forced some fumbles. They're not falling on it. They've had some interceptions in their hands. They've dropped. When's that tide going to turn? I'm certain the game plan is to try to create as much havoc as they can on Monday night to try and get Jared to throw them 1 or 2.
Yeah, and that brings me to another guy that you mentioned a couple of times, Devon Witherspoon. He was my number 1 cornerback target. That would have been, 2 seasons ago now, 2 drafts ago, right? I watched him. It was probably, October, November of his last year. And I watched, it was Illinois, and I watched, a few of his games, and he was like 12th, 13th, 4th, 5th round pick headed into December that year in all of the rankings. And I went out on a limb and I said, this is going to be the number 1 cornerback taken in the draft next year. Everyone thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
And I just watched him climb and climb and climb. And then by the end of the season, all you saw was about a list of 50 different awards that he just locked up. He's incredible. Devon Witherspoon is an absolute game changer. Again, I think the Lions missed out, but the Seahawks are right in front of us, and they got us twice. So, what we do to the Packers, the Seahawks always seem to do to the Lions. They were just happened to be in front of us, though. That's all right. We're still making some pretty good moves, I think, in the draft. I think Brad's done an excellent job. Seattle's run defense. Now, I would say that, you'd face A-Chain, right, against Miami?
Right.
So I don't remember how many yards he had, but Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are a complete nightmare for most defenses. It just depends on if the offensive line is able to do their job, and we've struggled at times. I mean, what we witnessed in the overtime game versus the Rams was incredible. That's who the offensive line is. We just ran it right down their throat, drove it 60 yards for the score, and the majority of it was on the back of David Montgomery, 45 yards of it.
Yeah.
And then in the next game, it kind of, disappears a little bit. And then in, week 3, it comes back. But it's still not that bully ball that we love to play where, we could just tell you I'm running it right here and we're going to run it right there and we're going to have success with it. That's the way that this line has been the last couple of seasons. It just hasn't been that way yet. Do you feel like this defense has, any shot at containing Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery? How have your linebackers been with, kind of biting on the play action? Well, I guess what's been hurting you most, defensively, if you could identify a few things.
Yeah, so they've out of the 3 games, they shut the Broncos running game down and they shut the Dolphins running game down. But then New England, they give up almost 200 yards rushing, and it was consistent. It was relentless throughout the game, and it wasn't just from Andre Stevenson. It was Antonio Gibson running more physically than I ever remember him running. I mean, he's always been thought of as a more of a third down back, pass catcher type. There were missed tackles in that game. There were some gap integrity issues. The Seahawks aren't they're capable of playing very, very good run defense. It's something that Mike Macdonald's done in his career, but they don't do it in sort of the traditional way. They don't have a bunch of big bodies up there, a bunch of 320, 330 guys up there, taking on multiple gaps and just really clogging up running lanes. Their fits have to be good. They've got to be disciplined. They got to be in the right place at the right time. And we saw some of those growing pains in week 2. There's a lot of new players on that defense, and it's a whole new scheme. Last week, Leonard Williams goes out and Byron Murphy goes out, and they're still able to control the run. But then the game gets out of hand the second half, and Miami has to throw the football. So again, we don't really know. Now, Jonathan Hankins stepped up, the veteran, and he is more of that type. He is a true nose tackle and has been valued as one of the better run stoppers in the league for a long time. He played a great game, but he's 32 years old, and now you're leaning on him a little bit more. As far as the second level goes, they had to import 2 new linebackers this year because both Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks left in free agency in the offseason. Terrell Dodson's been the better of the 2. Jerome Baker hasn't been out there. He's been injured. Don't know if he's going to play this week again. Dodson's been a little bit of a revelation. He's been really, really good at a couple tackles for loss against the Dolphins. He's a guy that seems to read things really well. The one area, though, that the Seahawks might have to lean into on Monday that might present an opportunity for the Lions is at the other spot. If Baker can't go, then once again, it's Tyrese Knight, 4th-round draft pick out of UTEP this week, who is dripping with talent and makes splash plays, but will be out of position at times too. And, it hasn't bitten them yet. So I don't know. I think it's the key to the game, to boil it down as simply as I can. We got to run the football. We got to stop the run. But through 3 games, we've seen good and bad. And against New England, it almost cost them a football game because they just couldn't stop it.
Well, Dan, this has been enlightening, man. I think that there's a lot of great information and nuggets. You've shared a lot of things that I think everyone wants to hear. If you were to give me, I mean, you've already really given me your kind of your biggest concerns and some keys to the games, but do you dare make a prediction in this game? Where do you see this going for? Where do you see this going for the Hawks in Ford Field again this year?
So, first of all, I usually shy away.
I'm usually always wrong. So
I was just going to say the same thing. I usually shy away from it. It's one of the reasons I do not gamble. I suck at it, especially when it comes to my own teams. If when the more sure I am, the less sure I probably should be based on my history. This week's been interesting because heading into the week, I thought, okay, I like where this team's at. I think this is a playoff team. I think we have a shot to win the division, and I think it's going to evolve that way as the season goes along. But this week, maybe it doesn't happen, and that's okay if we see some positive developments on the field, right? I mean, I think this is kind of that classic game where the Seahawks could come out of it with an L and the sky won't be falling, depending on what we see, right? Maybe it is a disaster. I don't see it that way. I think these teams have played the games they've played the last 2 years for a reason. And I expect a similar type of game. And so as the week has gone along, I went from, I don't know if we can get this one, and that's probably all right, to they can win it. I think they're certainly capable. We're just banking, we're leaning into concepts that we just haven't seen proof of on the field, right? I don't know what the over-under is right now, but whatever it is, I would take the over. I think it's going to be another shootout, and maybe it comes down to a turnover or a play here and there. Maybe even another overtime. I will say this, and this is why I tend to think that the Seahawks have a good chance to get out of there with the win on Monday. I think Geno Smith is on a mission. I think he's playing the best football of his career. I think the belief he has in himself and in this system and the weapons he has around him, if he gets more of the type of game from the offensive line that he got against the Dolphins than against, the Broncos in the first half or the Patriots, I think he might be the best player on the field outside of Aiden Hutchinson on Monday, and that gives the Seahawks a chance to win.
Interesting. Here's what I would like to say about Geno real quick before I run. I listened to him yesterday in his media availability, and I have to say that you guys have, I never really listened to a whole lot of Geno, but after listening to him talk, man, you want to talk about someone who is extremely positive. He just exudes positivity. I mean, he's sweating positivity. He doesn't want negativity around him. He's not, what he was saying is, everyone kind of has their own way. Everybody's got their own shtick of how they do things. Some, jump up and down, yell and scream and cuss and swear you out or whatever. Others, they're just kind of quiet. And then there's Geno, who wants to do nothing but be positive and find positive reinforcement in everything, especially with the young guys. And I think that's a large reason why your team is having success is you have a coach that's dynamic, that's doing things the right way, and you have a leader as a quarterback that is inflecting all of this positive energy into everything around them. So Geno's a good dude, man. You could tell he's just a stand-up guy. I mean, who knows what goes on behind closed doors, but at least from the outside looking in, he's exactly what you want on a team. So
it's refreshing, right? And we're really enjoying it here because unlike his predecessor, who was known as being uber positive as well, it's genuine, right? It's not contrived, it's not forced, and he takes accountability. I mean, what did he say after the game on Sunday? Even though the Seahawks got out of there with a blowout win, he was pissed at himself, if I apologize for the language, for the 2 interceptions he threw. He was upset with his performance, even though by most accounts, he was pretty great against the Dolphins. He holds himself accountable. He's the hardest worker on the team, and he leads by example. And which is why we sit where we are today, talking about a game like this and a matchup like this, where, everyone on the planet, including those of us here in Seattle, when the Seahawks traded Russell Wilson a couple of years ago, we thought, okay, here we go. Now we got to get our franchise quarterback. Who are we going to draft? I mean, I wish I could have all those hours of film watching I've done over the last 3 years on quarterback draft prospects back, because, Geno Smith just kind of went out and said, no, I got other ideas. And now the conversation here is like, when are they going to extend him? Right. So it's a great story. He's easy to root for. And, he still has his critics. I think there are some people that you just can't, once they make their mind up about a player, it's hard to change it. But I think those voices are becoming drowned out by the people who are starting to see him for the player he is.
Oh, we know that all too well about Jared Goff, and then they have gone.
He was left for dead, right?
They have hid underneath the largest rock that they could find, and they only come out when he starts to have a bad game or a rash of a couple of weeks. Then they disappear again. Yep. So, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. When the Lions go to Seattle, I'm gonna have to look you up. I do want
absolutely.
I do want to
gotta
get
happen
back
at some
there.
point.
Yeah, it has to. But this fall,
maybe in January.
There you go. No, hopefully not. No, that can't happen.
Nah,
Sorry.
we'll see.
But
I was trying. I spent the whole week trying to get out there for this game. It just didn't. Ultimately, I couldn't turn it around quick enough. It didn't work, but that would have been fun.
Well, you have a good contact now. We have bunches of season tickets, and next time around, if Seattle's back, just look me up early.
All right.
It's early, but it's an absolute pleasure. Hey, if we're in the playoffs together, I'd love to do it again. And everyone is saying thank you in the chat. They appreciate you coming on, and I do too, Dan. It was a pleasure meeting you, my man.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't like getting up early in the morning for much, but this was worth getting up for.
Well, I would say good luck, but I can't. I guess.
Yeah,
good luck.
I'm
I
with
gotta
you.
say good
Yeah.
luck.
Good game, right? I mean, that's kind of, yeah, good game.
Take care, Dan. All the best
All right,
to you.
man.
Take care.
All right. Hey, thanks, you too.
All right, bye-bye.
Adam Schefter at ESPN says there's 275,000 people.
Well, that was some party in downtown Detroit. 775,000 people shattering the NFL draft attendance record.
This is the future. Evolution. This is the future. Evolution.